Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. The movie I want to talk about today comes from 1970. This is Little Big Man, starring Dustin Hoffman, directed by Arthur Penn. And it culminates in the battle at Little Bighorn. I recently did a few videos back on John Ford's Ford Apache, where we get a fictionalized version of Custer, which reminded me of Little Big Man, a movie that seems to have been kind of forgotten, as well as its director, Arthur Penn. So this is based on a novel, 1964 novel by Thomas Berger. Very long, picaresque novel. It's a tall tale. I highly recommend it. I read it right after the movie came out, and I really loved it. And much of what's in the movie comes from the book, which is a story about Jack Crabb. In the beginning of the film, we see Dustin Hoffman in this remarkable makeup where he is supposed to be, I can't think if he's 111 or 121. So we know this is a tall tale. He's being interviewed by what appears to be a academic who wants to learn about what life was like in a Cheyenne in a Cheyenne culture, because Jack Crabb spent much of his life on a Cheyenne in this Cheyenne culture, and when he hears what he's supposed to say, just turn that tape recorder on. These were the days of tape recorders, and I'm going to tell you a real story, which begins the novel, his story, his life story, in flashback when he's a child. He's maybe 10 or 12 years old, and his parents, they're moving west, and they get ambushed by an Indian war party. The parents are killed. The kids, Jack and his older sister, manage to hide out, but are eventually rescued by another Indian from the Cheyenne tribe. So they're brought back to the camp. His older sister manages to escape, but Jack is basically brought up by this Cheyenne tribe, whose chief is Old Lodgkins. And Old Lodgkins is played by Chief Dan George, and just a marvelous performance. He was nominated for an Academy Award. The only nomination for an Academy Award that Little Big Man garnered. And he is full of wisdom, and Jack becomes like his grandson, and we learn a lot about the wisdom of the Cheyenne through Old Lodgkins, the character he portrays. And if you've seen the film, you know one of the famous lines from it is, "It's a good day to die." Sometimes the magic works, and sometimes it doesn't. He's a thoroughly delightful character. But then circumstances, as befitting a tall tale, interfere, and Jack goes back to white civilization, where he's taken in by a fundamentalist, severe preacher, and his very young, beautiful wife, who Jack comes to realize is sex star, played by Faye Dunaway, in a very delightful performance. And he gets religion. We get really a lot of the major plot elements of Westerns that we're very familiar with. This is kind of an anecdotal story. He gets religion. He gets involved with a snake oil salesman, played by Martin Balsam, a very rosy character who's losing his limbs one by one. He's even rosy when he and Jack are being tarred and feathered. He becomes a gunfighter. He comes up against Wild Bill Hickok, who's his friend and is trying to teach Jack Crabb some of the ways of the gunfighting profession. But nothing seems to stick. He becomes a town drunk, and then he becomes an Indian scout. And and this is where we have Custer coming into play. So, and Custer really kind of haunts this movie, Little Bighorn, because in the beginning of the film, Jack has announced that he's the only survivor of the Battle of Little Bighorn. There were a lot of people who claimed through the years after Little Bighorn. This was a very traumatic experience in American history at the time, and Custer was seen as a martyr to our manifest destiny by the population. So, and with this involvement with Custer, we get this portrayal, which now everybody in this movie basically is caricatured, and certainly Custer as well, played by Richard Mulligan. In a very strange performance, is a very strange depiction of Custer. He seems psychotic. He's very vain. He's arrogant. He doesn't listen to the advice of his officers. But somehow he gets involved with Jack Crab because they have this kind of special little relationship in a very haunting scene, particularly where Jack Crab goes to kill Custer at night in his tent as revenge. So we get so these characters are all the sister, the snake oil salesman, Wild Bill Hickok. They reappear later in the film, in the second half of the film, as befits a tall tale. So Custer is eventually we will get to Little Bighorn, and here we see Custer at his most psychotic. He's ignored all the advice of how to proceed, and he has this grudge against General Grant, now President Grant. Grant never liked him, and Grant thought, because Custer had been a hero of the Civil War, and he was at Gettysburg, cavalry officer, but Custer thought he should be president, and this which was true, and he hoped that he would obtain enough glory in these Indian wars that would propel him to be nominated for president of the Democratic Party, because Custer was very well known. He was well known as a hero of the Civil War. So before we get to Custer, before we get to Little Bighorn, we see a recreation of the Washita River Massacre. This is where Custer's troops went into an Indian encampment that was supposedly on protected land, but they were searching for war parties, and they basically massacred a whole lot of people, women, children. This was total war, and Custer was following a certain guideline that General Sherman, his commanding officer down the line, and also General Sheridan, was total war, the kind of total war that Sherman had used in his march through Georgia, where you annihilate the civilization. He thought Sherman thought this was the only way to realize that there was no hope for the Indians. So we see this, and we see women and children massacred, and certainly this is in 1970 especially, we're seeing a kind of Vietnam War reenactment as well, and the atrocities committed by American soldiers. My Lai massacre was well known, and soldiers were coming home with very terrible stories and haunted by their experiences, and all this plays into Little Big Man. Now, when Berger wrote the novel, it was 1964. We were in Vietnam, but there was no, broader Vietnam War. It wasn't until after 64, after 65, which that occurred. So he wasn't deliberately writing about Vietnam. But certainly this film is to an audience in 1970s. In 1970, you would pick up on what we're seeing on nightly TV in these horrible massacres, which are visually so compelling. I mean, it's really all played to the music as they charged through the Indian village, all played to the Gary Owen music that the cavalry loved to use when they went into battle. So we get these Vietnam parallels that I saw the movie in 1970, and it made a deep impression on me for sure, and audiences as well. We were seeing this is revisionist version of American history, but it's couched in a kind of tall tale kind of way, to the point where we're seeing what we're seeing is sort of a myth being debunked, which we get another view of history. And the director Arthur Penn is a very interesting director. He's sort of forgotten the movie, both the movie and the director are sort of forgotten. But in 1970, when this film came out, Arthur Penn was considered a very estimable director, and in fact, by many people, he was thought one of the great new Hollywood directors. He had made his big splash with Bonnie and Clyde, which was about 3 years before, with Faye Dunaway, Warren Beatty, and he was a filmmaker. He started out in the late 50s. He made a film, The Left-Handed Gun, about Billy the Kid, with Paul Newman playing Billy the Kid. So again, American mythology. The Miracle Worker was a TV drama that he directed. It was adopted for the stage, and then into a very memorable movie with Patty Duke and Bancroft. Then he had a couple duds with Mickey One with Warren Beatty, and then again The Chase with a great cast: Robert Redford, Marlon Brando, Jane Fonda, many more. But that didn't work with the public or the critics. Bonnie and Clyde was, because of its balletic violence that preceded Sam Peckinpah's balletic violence in The Wild Bunch. It was very divisive, but then a lot of the critics really rallied around Bonnie and Clyde, and then it became a big hit and one of the most emblematic movies, I think, of Hollywood after the production code had fallen away. So he was interested, and then after that came Alice's Restaurant, which was the story from a song by Arlo Guthrie and about his induction physical, as something I went through myself. So I was identified very much with the craziness of induction physical in 1970 at the height of the craziness of the Vietnam War period. That wasn't a big hit, but then Little Big Man did very well. After that, Arthur Penn's career just basically tanked. He did make Night Moves a few years later, which recently came out of the Criterion Collection. I did a review of it. It's certainly a very good detective movie, but it didn't do anything at the box office. And Missouri Breaks with Brando and Nicholson, how could that have missed? Did not do well with either the critics or the audience. And his career just continued to kind of fizzle out. But he was the president of the Actors Studio in New York, so he was very active, and I would imagine a lot of movies fell through the cracks. I don't know his full biography, projects, and the projects that he ended up making, like Target was one with Gene Hackman, Five Friends, I think it was called, another one, Dead of Winter, Penn and Teller Get Killed. None of these films garnered any really kind of recognition. So Penn is really had one of the strangest careers, I think, in Hollywood history. And Dustin Hoffman as Jack Crabbe, he is terrific. He was at the height of his popularity. Of course, Benjamin and The Graduate, Ratso Rizzo, and Midnight Cowboy. And this is really an actor's tour de force, where you can play Jack Crabbe as a young man, and then as 100 in all different phases of his life. beautifully photographed, a great score by John Hammond, which is guitar and harmonica. The movie was very well received by a lot of critics. Vincent Canby of New York Times praised it, and Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars in 1970. So that's Little Big Man. And I want to thank everybody for listening. Comments are welcome. Take care.